What comes to mind when you think of New York City? Times Square? The Empire State Building? Both common landmarks of the city that never sleeps. But what remains of its history? Where can one locate its roots? You might know where the Brooklyn Bridge rests, but have you heard of South Street that lies just below and the surrounding seaport? Meet Barbara Mensch, photographer, artist, and an author. She moved into the area in 1979 and instantly knew this was home. Her photographs were the inspiration behind her award-winning book, fittingly titled South Street.
I completely fell in love with this place because I had the bridge. I had one of the most inspirational structures right outside my window. There are no words that I can use to describe what it was like to live down here in the late 70s and early 80s. It had the most intrigue, the most nocturnal beauty.
The rich history of South Street began in the mid-1700s, but it was over 75 years later when an old building reshaped the landscape. The Fulton Fish Market opened its doors on January 22, 1822, and expanded to a newer structure next door in 1936. It was the largest wholesale seafood market in the Western Hemisphere, and for 130 years, New York had the busiest port in the world. This is Frank Mineo, president of Smitty's Filet House. His father started the business in 1946, and young Frank wanted nothing to do with the industry. But after his father's passing in 1978, it was up to Frank to take over the family's business, and he was instantly thrown into the market's unique world.
Trucks would come in with tons of fish, and they would actually be laid out in the streets of New York. The streets of New York from 1 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock in the morning was an emporium of fish right in the middle of the street.
It was the hub for the food industry. For the New York population, the fish market was an essential place for decades and generations.
As New York City rested, the fish market was alive at night. It functioned as its own unique world, governed by its own rules and code of ethics. It was enforced not by the proper authorities, but instead by the fishmongers themselves, and a group known for settling its own brand of justice, the mob.
There was a code, there was an honor. You didn't do certain things. In the market, if somebody didn't like you, they didn't like you. And it was very clear and it was up front. There was a common sense to their gangsterism that, the best thing to do is to run a good place. We're going to make a lot of money on various different enterprises, but we don't want to bring attention to ourselves. So there was nothing. The only violence that occurred was when outside forces came in.
As the market thrived, those outside forces began to take notice. The expansion of the nearby Wall Street sector had the emerging corporations focusing on the potential land value of this premier waterfront location.
It was becoming a corporate world where corporations' money called the shots. In the early morning, I would see the Wall Street workers coming. It was such a fascinating view of our culture to see the blue collar and the white collar mixing together on this one street.
Two worlds were colliding. Blue collar versus white collar. Two worlds that could not mesh with one another. One had to go, and thus an epic power struggle began.
Well, we fought the city for a long time. We took the city to court. I had to give a speech at City Hall to City Council telling them that what they were doing was wrong, but you know what? There's a juggernaut. And it's money in real estate.
After several attempts of relocating the market, the city finally made the move in 2005 to a location 12 miles northeast to the Bronx. The market was abandoned and remained empty for 2 years. And then, in 2007, a certain individual came up with an innovative idea and convinced local New Yorkers, such as Madeline Rogers, to come on board.
Robert LaValva was a great visionary, an architect, a city planner, who saw these buildings and saw a tremendous potential there to revitalize these buildings and reuse them in a historically appropriate way.
Robert LaValva created the new Amsterdam market as an open, periodic farmers market. It opened to rave reviews, and brought in thousands of visitors each week.
I think the New Amsterdam market was successful because it was an idea whose time had come. Artisanal food, locally grown food, naturally produced food, sustainable agriculture, all of these things are very much of the moment. And Robert was tapping into that in a very real way.
But in 2010, a major developer from Dallas emerged. The Howard Hughes Corporation obtained a 60-year lease on spaces within the Seaport District at a very generous price from the city's Economic Development Corporation. The New Amsterdam market was in jeopardy. Another power struggle ensued, and yet again, the result was all too predictable.
We started to get the feeling that we were fighting an immovable obstacle, that the city would just as soon see a private developer come in and have their way with that site. Their plans for the new market building are to tear it down and to build a luxury condominium there on the site of the only remaining waterfront market shed in the city.
The fish market buildings were public property controlled by the city and not part of the lease Howard Hughes originally obtained. Crucial to their redevelopment plans was to win approval from city politicians and the general public. Enter Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, who with other local leaders formed a group to ensure the Howard Hughes Corporation would follow guidelines to preserve the city's Seaport District.
It's the oldest historic area in the city, and some of us felt that we didn't want a tower without more discussion. I do think that this particular tall tower doesn't maintain the guidelines of maintaining the historic district.
December 2014. Christmas in the city usually brings holiday cheer, but in Lower Manhattan, the battle over its seaport is heating up. Howard Hughes has altered its plans for the tower, but still has not changed its location and did not respond to requests to be interviewed for this story. But the South Street story wages on for the residents of New York City, for people like Madeline Rogers and Frank Mineo, and for Barbara Mensch, who wants to keep her beloved neighborhood and its history intact. And as the new year slowly rolls in, the future of New York City's last piece of historical importance remains in limbo.
I think we're losing the soul of the seaport to a commercial developer, and I think it's very unfortunate that the city of New York has betrayed its public trust by allowing such a historic site to be taken over by a private developer.
It's sad, but it's sad for me because of something that's gone that'll never be back here. I mean, you know, this is, you could fight it, but what are you fighting? It's over. This battle is lost.
I hope we're wrong. I hope that the city will come to its senses and will decide to save those buildings and use them in an appropriate way.
To me, it was such a bigger story about the struggle for survival in New York of this important economic engine and how, in the end, it got destroyed.